Hi everyone, and welcome back to the shack for some long awaited upgrades to the Omega MSX compatible home computer that we built last Christmas. And more importantly, we get to take a look at some games for the MSX that weren't just Spectrum conversions and that really show off the power of the machine. Oh, and there's a lesson or two to learn along the way as well. Let's crack on. Here at the Shack, we'd like to give a huge thank you to the sponsor for this video, PCBWay. They help us out with all of our PCB fabrication needs and make fantastic boards at amazingly competitive prices. And it's not only PCBs that are on the menu. Apart from other fabrication services like CNC machining, 3D printing, sheet metal fabrication and injection moulding, PCBWay also have a great projects library of cool stuff to build from people all around the world. Oh, and if you don't like waving a soldering iron about, they can even assemble your PCBs for you. That's the PCB way. Right, on with the show. Well, if you watched the last set of videos about the build of this machine, you'll recall that I had some grand ideas going forward, but weeks turned into months, and then other projects took over. I'm a bit like a magpie, and there's always something shiny and new. But anyway, I then decided enough was enough, and it was time to actually fit a few of the sensible upgrades, and to take a look at the side of the MSX that everyone was telling me to, the stuff written specifically for it, and on cartridge. As we open up the case, you'll note straight away that I've fitted a power switch over here and also a push button reset switch which runs to these headers over here. You'll also notice these multicoloured ribbon cables which are extension cables for the joystick ports, moving them from the front of the PCB where we can't reach them to the side of the machine where we can. This additional switch you can see here next to the reset button is important for one of those lessons I mentioned at the start, so remember that. Also, the power switch on the left hand side here is very close to that green PCB. What's that all about? I bet that's important too. Well, it is, because it's a rotary volume control attached to an amplifier board to power some internal speakers. What internal speakers, you say? I can't see any internal speakers. Well, in this case, they're designed to fit into the top of the case. So clearly we're going to have to make sure we have a way to easily connect and disconnect them when we want to take the top off in the future. So that's where things will sit. Let's take out this amplifier board and wire it into our Omega. And as you'd expect, there's not really a lot to this. There's the inputs for left and right audio with a shared ground pin. There are 2 pin outputs for each speaker and a couple of points in the centre to supply power from somewhere on the board. Time for a rummage in my big old box of never-ending wires and pull out some that look suitable. For the wires to come from the board to the amplifier and back out to the speakers, and the small piece of wire to bridge the stereo input, because the Omega only produces mono output, simple patch wire will be absolutely fine. Right, let's get a soldering, and we'll start with the power connections to the amplifier. Just double check the position of the positive and negative connections, and then a quick dab of solder, and they're in place. Quick tidy up of the ends, as we wouldn't want anything poking out and shorting something on the board, would we? No, we wouldn't want that at all. So with the power input sorted, let's sort out the sound input, and for this and the speaker output I'm using 8 ohm speaker wire, and as previously mentioned, the Omega doesn't have stereo output, so we'll bridge the left and right channels at the input here. With the wires stripped and tinned, we'll solder in the right input channel wire and the central ground. Once that's done, we'll bridge the left input channel from the right channel using this small piece of wire. And there, now we just have to wire in the speaker outputs. And yes, of course we'll check for shorts and continuity at this point. Wouldn't want anything to be shorting out and causing issues, would we? We've bridged the speaker outputs also, simply because then we only have to worry about one connector rather than two. And before fitting into the case, we'll slap a load of Kapton tape on the bottom too, so we don't get any shorts. I hope you're picking up on the very subtle foreshadowing that I'm dropping in here occasionally. Okay, let's pop the amplifier into the case, laying it out first to make sure we've got the wires at the right length, and when it's nice and firmly in place, we'll pull power from this expansion power rail. And yes, we have of course double checked that we're pulling from the right pins on the rail, as we wouldn't want anything nasty to happen. Okay, I'll stop now, I think you've got the idea. To pull the audio signal from the board, we're tapping from the signal that goes to the audio RCA jack, which is nice and simple. The speakers themselves will have a connector so that we can remove the top case without having to desolder anything. So we'll quickly solder the connector to the wires from the amplifier, and then we'll need to wire the speakers together as well, as we only have that one bridged audio out wire from the amplifier. I reckon that we're now ready to put this all together, and with a high level of confidence, everything should sound glorious. So let's power on and... oh no! Something has gone wrong. How unexpected and unforeseen. I jest now, but at the time I was somewhat fuming. After a little bit of investigation, I found that with the amplifier unit installed like this, the metal top of the volume potentiometer rested up against these VRAM chips here, causing a short and doing goodness knows what damage. So should I have spotted that? Of course I should, but hey, let's find out what's gone kaput. And my first thought was that it was one of these 41464 RAM chips, so I tested them all, and yep, 2 of them had gone to the great chip repository in the sky. I replaced all of them and instead started getting this memory not found error, so I figured I'd also blown the AS6C4008 512K RAM bank, so I replaced that also and got the same error. Thus began a very time consuming breakdown and systematic reinstall and check of every chip on the board, and I could find nothing else wrong. Now at this point I was all but ready to pop it back on the shelf for a bit when I thought, what if, and tried another AS6C4008 memory chip, and the system sprang to life. The replacement memory I'd bought was also a dud. Oh well, I'll move the amplifier over here where there's less stuff for it to tangle with, and I'll put the reset switch over on the other side where it probably should have gone in the first place, and where it logically sits next to the power on off switch. As for this switch, wasn't this a problem also? Nah, but it was another stupid idea. I was going to use this to turn the amplifier on and off, but the rotary volume control has an off setting you can click into at the end of its range of movement. So let's turn the speakers on and give them a little try. Okay, and now let's turn the volume up a bit. Very nice, and you may be wondering why bother if you can output through the TV. Well, the next episode I want to install this media hat, which gives me access to a variety of different outputs, and some monitors don't have speakers. And anyway, there was a space in the case for speakers and I can't help myself. This reset switch is a real switch and socket saver if you need to reset the machine often, which you will do if you've got one of these. The final part of today's episode, the SD mapper and MegaRAM. This device, which was just under €100 and had to be shipped from Brazil, has 2 selectable SD card slots and can be switched to work in one of 2 modes. The first is called Mapper mode, which essentially adds 512K of memory to your MSX, and that allows you to run the next tour DOS2 OS extensions, which provide loads of new commands to make it easier to navigate the SD card as a FAT16 hard disk, and also makes it easy to swap files with a PC. The second mode is called MegaRAM, and the 512K of memory will be set up as a RAM expansion that allows you to run MegaRAM cartridges, typically of a size higher than 128K. Let's take a look at it in action. We'll switch the cartridge to MegaRAM mode and insert it in the machine. And I need to thank friend of the channel Andy Pine, who, as well as donating the Atari VCS we featured in the last episode, he also very kindly donated lots of other goodies, one of which was this amazing Philips CM8833 monitor, which, as everyone will know, is an absolutely stunning CRT and makes these retro machines complete. Cheers Andy, you'll be seeing this used a lot on the channel. Once the machine has booted up, the MegaRAM cartridge pops you into the SD card and you can navigate around to your heart's content, but be warned, some of the content on the supplied SD card is very adult themed and very graphic, so if you get one of these, please check before letting the nippers have a play. Okay, so in the MSX video I put up on the channel last year, I showed some games on the platform that were straight Spectrum conversions, and I was hauled over the coals for not showing what the machine can actually do when programmed correctly. So let's take a look at a few games, starting with the MSX1 and Salamander. Now, one thing that strikes you straight away is that this looks nothing like a Spectrum game at all. There are multicolour sprites for a start. The sound also is definitely a step up from the Specky beeper. The MSX was home to a large number of sideways scrollers, such as Nemesis, or Gradius as it was known in other parts of the world, and of course R-Type, along with loads of vertical scrollers, which looked better because the MSX1 didn't have hardware scrolling, and up and down was easier to pull off smoothly in software than left and right. Okay, let's take a look at another MSX classic, which is probably only one of two Penguin-based games I know of, the other being Pengu. Do you know of any more? If so, please let me know in the comments. This game is often brought out to show the capabilities of the MSX and bears a resemblance to Trailblazer in its mechanics, which also form the basis to games like Crash Bandicoot and other modern Temple Run games. Let's have a go. Now, as many of you will know, even though I love retro games, I'm not very good at playing them. I think I've just not got the attention span or patience I had when I was younger. Back then, if I'd paid £10 of my own money for a game, it was getting played until my fingers wore off. Well, you can see why people love the look of this game, and even though you can tell that the background isn't really moving at all, there's just some clever switching out of a few graphics to simulate the movement, it's very effective when coupled with this little waddly fellow jumping to catch the fish and avoiding the holes in the ground. You know, a typical Penguin day. But I've got to admit, it is fun. So I mentioned that the MSX didn't have hardware scrolling and that this proved problematic in side scrollers. It's very evident in this next game, Fantasy Zone, which started life as an arcade game and was ported to numerous platforms with varying levels of success. As we can see here, the MSX1 version is colourful enough, and it's only really the single colour enemies and the jerky scrolling that lets it down. But it does act as a good segue into our first MSX2 game, also Fantasy Zone. Fantasy Zone 2 in fact, and you can see here where the extra power of the MSX2 comes into play. Lovely smooth scrolling, more colourful sprites with no colour clash at all, and well, it all just looks a little bit more polished and advanced. Still, a strange game though. Let's take a look at one of the big names which started life on the MSX and was in fact the first game by legendary games designer Hideo Kojima. It's the one and only Metal Gear, and was famous for being the first successful stealth-based game where the objective was to infiltrate the enemy base without being detected, a game mechanic which rippled through all of the other Metal Gear games and has since become a staple archetype in today's games. It certainly looks the part with those typical Konami chunky military visuals, and it is fun to play, although the constant phone calls in-game should have been a warning to all of us about the intrusive nature of cell phones. Okay, one last game to look at, and that's Outrun. A very different outing to that shown running on the Toshiba HX10 MSX we looked at last year. That was a Spectrum conversion. This is built for the machine. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the episode, and thanks for watching. Please leave your comments below, and if you haven't already subscribed, we'd very much welcome the support. So, until next time in the shack, it's goodbye from me.